I'm speaking in good faith today with Colin Campbell, who's a writer and a director for theater and film. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Seraglio, a short film he wrote and directed, with his wife, Gail Lerner. He's taught theater and filmmaking at Chapman University, Loyola Marymount University, Cal Poly Pomona, and to incarcerated youth through The Unusual Suspects. His one-person show On Grief premiered at the Hollywood Fringe Festival, where it won a Best of Broadwater award. He lives in Los Angeles. We're speaking to him from his home there, and sometimes Joshua Tree in California. Colin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Steve.
Our reason to reach out to you was your book called Finding the Words, an entire book about grief that really is the result of a very painful event, a crash with you and your wife and your two teenage children in which they were killed. And I think from the outset, will you please introduce us to these very interesting sounding children, Ruby and Hart? Will you tell me something about them?
Yeah. They were fantastic. I know I'm biased, but they were really extraordinary children. And Ruby was 17 when she was killed, and Hart was 14. So they were teens, they were teenagers, and brimming with life. So Ruby had gone on a very challenging journey. She struggled with OCD and depression and suicidality in her early teens. But a really remarkable thing happened right towards the end of her life, which is that she found the right therapist, the right medication, and really transformed in a very beautiful way. And so she became an extraordinary artist, and a voracious one at that, a self-taught one. I mean, she took classes, but she also taught herself. She would just always be in the corner on the couch, just studying a new technique and then putting it into practice. Digital art, watercolor, pen, ink, crayons. It was really, really wonderful, amazing artwork. And she really discovered her own sexuality in a really powerful way. She came out as a lesbian, and at first it was hard for her. There was a lot of stigma around it from her. She felt from her community, not from us. We were very loving and supportive right from the start. But by the end, she was really proud of who she was, and that was a beautiful thing to see. Beautiful thing to see. And she was really like a leader among her friend group. She was like the one who ended bullying basically at her school. Because she was so cool and such a fierce defender of people who were being bullied that it stopped. And Hart, he was an amazing young man, so funny, so hilarious, a nonstop fount of ridiculous characters, often inappropriate,
Which is all the more
but
fun to read about in the stories you share.
yeah. I was giving a talk about him to the high school gathered for chapel. He went to an Episcopalian school, and I had to say that I couldn't really do any of his jokes because they were all inappropriate for chapel. But he was a wonderful performer and so kind. They're both so kind. That's really the most salient feature of both of them. Their deep kindness.
Well,
Yeah.
I loved getting to know them through the book and how you and your wife have really kept them in your life rather than try and say that's a painful part I need to shut off. The whole title of the
Yeah.
book, Finding the Words, you refer to sort of a phenomenon where I think people mean to be helpful and they use this phrase you bring up, there are no words. Can you
Yeah.
talk to me about why those aren't great words to share with people who've suffered a catastrophic loss?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So all these people who said this phrase to me, there are no words, they were all incredibly loving, right? And they were all trying to be helpful in the face of this sort of unfathomable loss. And what do you say to somebody? But what struck me on the receiving end was it was bizarre how often that phrase was used. That was like the go-to phrase for literally hundreds of people. And so for me on the receiving end, at first I was like, oh yes, there are no words. You're absolutely right. But then after, say, the 50th or the 80th or the 100th time I heard that phrase, I started to wonder, well, wait a minute. Are there words? because saying there are no words, it often acted as a conversation stopper. That was sort of it. That was the end. That was their one catchphrase they could use, and then the conversation was over. And I had discovered that I really needed to talk about my grief, my loss, and about Ruby and Hart. I wanted to talk about them. I needed to, because it was so difficult to literally understand what was happening to me. I needed to talk about it just to process it.
What I feel as I read the book is this almost a superhuman, or almost, what do I call it? A consciously painful embrace of, or a conscious embrace of a painful situation that you
Yeah.
that you chose to go through, in a way, to really learn what was happening, and even to teach others around you, which is terrible to think that you, as the mourners, have to take time or energy to teach anyone anything. But you
Yeah.
certainly done it in
Yeah.
the book. But even in the moment, can you talk to me about what you called the grief spiel, which
Yes.
you adapted for different situations, but I think can be so instructive to any of us?
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is that nobody really knows what to say, right, in these situations. And it's so easy to think the best thing to do is to back away, is to say maybe there are no words, and then leave it at that, and then retreat. And assume that the person who's grieving wants to be left alone. Because that's kind of what we see in the movies and TV, right? So, over and over again. We see someone suffers a catastrophic loss and they want to be left alone to grieve. And the reality is that grievers spend a lot of time alone. And what we really need is community, because we get plenty of alone time. I've never heard anybody in any of the grief circles I've ever been in telling me that they've got too much community. They've had too many people reach out to them, right? I've never heard that. But I have heard the inverse over and over and over again. That people don't get it, they don't reach out, they feel abandoned by their friends and family. And so I think maybe because I have a background in theater, my wife and I are both theater kids at heart, that maybe there was a facility with reaching out to people, or also maybe it was just desperation. There was a level of desperation. It was like, it's very socially awkward to tell somebody what your emotional need is, right?
Yeah.
In the society, we're taught not to do that. Don't ask for help, you know. But we were both so desperate. Felt like we were literally losing our minds if we couldn't talk about Ruby and Hart. And so it seemed like the right thing to do to tell people that. You know, they came in through our front door and they were terrified of saying the wrong thing. Even just saying like, "Hi, how are you?" They were scared to say that, because what if I said, "How am I? How do you think I am? How dare you ask me how I am? My children were murdered. Oh my God." And so that, I think, was a fear in some people's minds. And so my wife and I discovered that if we told people, you know, one at a time, that was our grief spiel. It was like, listen, we actually need to talk about Ruby and Hart. We need to talk about our grief and our loss. That put them at ease. They're like, "Oh, thank you for this guidance. Thank you for giving us, you know, the ground rules for how to interact with you, because we have no idea." So that's how the grief spiel started.
And that you let them know that not only was it okay to mention your children's names, but you wanted to know people's stories and
Right,
interactions.
right. That was the sort of beautiful side effect, which was that we could ask people, tell us a Ruby and Hart story. And oftentimes people would tell us things that we didn't know. You know, we never heard these stories. We didn't know that you had this interaction with our kids. You know what I mean? Because who knows? In the flow of life, you don't know everything that happens with your children. And so we got these amazing gifts from people. You know, new memories of people who were gone forever. So they were invaluable. Yeah.
To read the table of contents, it's really interesting to me. You talk about these are real things that people face,
Yeah.
from fear, good things like community, but also you have chapters like pain, denial, holidays, guilt, rage, despair, as well as meaning and purpose. So to use the phrase you have used throughout the book, you have leaned into this experience to understand it. And so you have this book, Finding the Words, when people say there are no words. How has this helped you to explore your own, even though they were difficult, your own feelings and
Yeah,
experiences.
yeah. You know, the title "Finding Finding the Words." I think some people assume that it's really about other people finding the words to talk to people in grief, but really the main thrust of the book is actually helping people who are grieving find their own words. And I think it's very hard. It's very hard to process, what on some level is unfathomable. Losing your children, or really any catastrophic, profound loss. If you have a best friend who means the world to you and they die, who are you now, right? How do you process that? And I discovered that it really helped to talk about it. It really helped to write about it. That was my journey, was finding the words. Like, what is this feeling that I'm having, and what do I want to have happen now? And by thinking about it, by articulating it, it really helped me get a handle on it. So it didn't feel like I was just a victim of grief, but I was actually traveling through it on some level.
You write very movingly of support received from members of your community in the synagogue that you attend, Ikar. We've been privileged to previously have a guest, Melissa Balaban, from the synagogue.
She's extraordinary, yeah.
Will you tell me about this mourner's Kaddish?
Yeah.
And the whole idea that you end up for me, this was very insightful into something I've just read a little bit about, where you're actually inviting people into your home at the time you most might want to say, I need some time alone.
Yeah, so my wife is Jewish. I'm not. I was raised by WASP atheists. So I grew up as an atheist, and I love being an atheist, but I had no cultural traditions around grieving, right? Really none at all. I was at a total loss. And we raised our kids as Jews, so Hart and Ruby were both bar and bat mitzvahed. And we were active members of our temple. And I really leaned into these Jewish traditions because I was like, I've got nothing. So I was like, I figured the Jews have been doing this for thousands of years. I'm going to listen to them. Whatever my rabbi says, I'm going to do it because I got nothing. And our rabbi, Sharon Brass, is extraordinary, as is Melissa, who runs the temple. And they both incidentally came to our house just hours after the crash and held our hands, both of them, literally and figuratively, through those first awful days in such an extraordinary way. But what I learned from practicing the Jewish traditions of grieving were such valuable lessons, because I was looking at it as somebody who's not a believer. So it wasn't about God, it was about practicalness, practicality. What are these things doing? And so one of the first lessons I learned is Shiva. So Shiva is the period of mourning that lasts for a week after the funeral. And every night, your community comes to your house and sits with you, literally sits with you, sitting Shiva. And at first, I was like, what? People are coming to my house, just like you pointed out. I don't want that. I'm in intense grief. I want to be left alone, I think. But then when they actually arrive, I suddenly found, wow, I really needed this community to be here because I wanted to talk about Ruby and Hart to a room full of people. I wanted to have them talk about Ruby and Hart. I want us all to grieve together, to grieve in community. And that ran contrary to my ideas about what grief was. I thought grief was you go off in your corner and you're sad for a while and then you get fixed somehow. And here I was in community grieving, and it felt so helpful. And so night after night, people would come to our house and I'd be like, oh no, not again. And then by the end of the evening, I was like, oh, I'm so grateful that they're here. I'm so grateful that we're telling stories. I have so much to say that I need to say. And then I want to also mention the mourner's Kaddish, which you mentioned. So that's the mourner's prayer. And it's in Hebrew, and I don't speak Hebrew, but it's a very interesting prayer. It's known as the mourner's prayer, but it doesn't mention grief at all. It references God like 13 times, and it talks just sort of positively about God's beauty and bountiness and wishing for a good life. And so that was interesting to me. But what's most interesting is you have to say the mourner's prayer every day for the whole year, and then on every holiday. but you can't say it alone. You have to say it with at least 9 other people present. And that was an
Yes.
extraordinary thing, because here I was grieving. So when you say the prayer, I would start to weep naturally, right? And I'm in community. I'm weeping publicly, day after day, with these people who have offered to stand with me in my grief and then amen me. So what happens during the prayer is several points. The people in that are listening, that are with you, they say amen. And for me, it was like, oh, they are validating my grief in a way. They are bearing witness and saying what you're doing is good, right? You're amen to that. Amen to you expressing your pain publicly. And that was a very powerful lesson as well.
I wonder, do you have a copy of your book at
I do,
hand?
yes, I do.
Just happen to own a
I do own a
copy.
copy of my book.
Yes. I'm looking at page 52.
Yes.
So this is quite a moving section as we read your book here in preparation for the interview,
Yeah.
where you talk about the idea of God is love, and how even as an atheist you have found an angle that worked for
Yeah.
you. And I don't know if you want to talk about this or if you particularly want to read
Yeah, I could read it.
about 4 sentences down there. It's you start with uh, in the mourner's cottage alone God is referenced 13
Yes, yeah.
times.
So
Would you mind?
No, I'd love to. Thank you. In the mourner's cottage alone, God is referenced 13 times. It's hard when you just don't believe in an all-powerful deity, but I discovered a helpful trick. I replaced every reference to God and He and Holy One with the word love. It works incredibly well. Even some of the stranger references to God in the Bible or Torah turn out to have new, beautiful meanings. Phrases such as, may He smite our enemies, translate into the charming idea, may love smite our enemies. It's a nice visual, the most irritating people in my life suddenly becoming love-struck. Sometimes, when I think of the word love, I imagine it as a positive, life-affirming force that courses through all beings. And sometimes I specifically imagine the love I shared with Ruby and Hart. Exalted and hallowed be Ruby and Hart's love. May Ruby and Hart's love be blessed forever and for all eternity. Blessed and praised, glorified, exalted, and extolled, honored, adored, and lauded be the name of Ruby and Hart's love. Amen.
Turning that around seemed to give you a way to share in that community experience, even with believers and non-believers.
Yes. The idea of community seems so important to everyday life, let alone grief. That I really continue to love being a part of our synagogue, even though I said I don't really believe in an all-powerful deity, but I do believe in love. I do believe that in the power of love, and I believe that it does transcend the mortal realm. I feel Ruby and Hart's love. Certainly on good days I do. And it's changed me and shaped me, and I believe in the power of love. So that was a nice way for me to really get behind all those biblical passages. Yeah.
You talk about the idea in a chapter on ritual that mourning rituals don't actually make us more sad, which is great to hear in words.
Yeah.
People are often thinking, well, if I bring up their names, that might cause sadness. But you point out we are already as sad as we can get.
Yeah.
Will you talk to me about
Yeah,
this?
thank you. Absolutely. So what part of the grief spiel was, I would say, you can't trigger me because I'm already triggered. I'm triggered all the way. It doesn't
Yeah.
get more triggered than this. And that idea, I think, helped people because, as you say, they're scared. Like, what if I make them sad? I'm already sad. I haven't forgotten my kids were killed. I never forget my kids are killed. In my dreams, I remember that my kids are killed. So it's always with me. And I might cry. It's true. If you start talking about Ruby and Hart to me, I might tear up. But that's not bad. That's part of love. That's the beautiful, painful flip side of love. And so I have a new relationship to tears and pain, and So all these moments are tough but good in the end.
Colin, at some point, you started writing these thoughts down. And I don't know if you imagined this will be a book or this was therapeutic.
Mm.
Talk to me about that process.
Yeah. So right away I started journaling, and I'd never journaled before. I think I felt self-conscious about it or whatever. I had ideas of what journaling meant, but suddenly I needed to. I needed to write down just to understand again what's happening. And then I started writing a solo show, a one-man show about grief, which was dark and darkly comedic. And that was sort of my first foray into processing it for the public eye. And so it's called Grief, a one-man shit show. And I actually performed it this past summer at the Hollywood Fringe Festival, and then again in New York just a month ago for a month-long run. And it went really well, and it was a beautiful experience. But then after I finished writing the script of the one-man show, it was about 5 months after the car crash, and then COVID came and shut the whole world down. So I wasn't able to perform my piece. Yeah. Everyone went into lockdown, but I still had this need to share and talk and process. And I did think that I had something worth sharing because my wife and I did find ways, as I said, of keeping our community close by the grief spiel, by rituals, by actively asking our friends for help. And so I thought that was useful because many people in grief groups that I'd been in talked a lot and very bitterly about how they felt abandoned by their community. And I thought, well, I think I have some tools that could help. Can't solve everybody's problems, but maybe I could help some people keep more of their community and be less isolated in their grief. And that was an initial impulse to writing. And then also, like you said, just literally further processing my own grief, my own thoughts about it, helped me.
You even talk about creating. There are these morning rituals that a tradition may have. Like you said, let's trust thousands of years of experience with the Jewish tradition, and which turns out to be a big help. You said you also created personal morning rituals for Ruby and Hart. Do you mind talking about that?
Oh, yeah. So we first were inspired to do these sort of more public rituals, inviting people in and holding these ceremonies, and was very helpful. But I found I really wanted, almost on a daily basis, to be encountering Ruby and Hart, their spirit, in one way or another. And I just discovered a number of different things we kept sort of doing, my wife and I. I wear some clothes that belong to Ruby and Hart. They gave me a baseball cap. Well, they were going to give it to me for Father's Day, but they were killed just a few days before Father's Day. So they never actually got to give me this gift, but I got it, and I got to wear it now and think about them. We have pictures of them up, and my wife and I toast them every time we have a drink or cocktail. We toast Ruby and Hart.
I loved reading about that one.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's nice.
You mentioned Father's Day, which brings me to you talk about different holidays, some that you sort of enhanced, others that you thought we're skipping that this year, from Thanksgiving to a Seder to Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah.
Talk to me about maybe that Thanksgiving.
Yeah, so
that
first Thanksgiving was going to be so hard. So they were killed in June, and so this was November, so July, August, 5 months later, right? I'm doing my math right. And we were, the thought of gathering for a festival, for a celebration of giving thanks. We were not in a thankful mood, to say the least. And the thought of gathering and having these empty plates was just so scary. But I thought, I had learned that rituals are a way of processing grief with community. And so here is a gathering, a Thanksgiving gathering with our families, is another opportunity for us to share our grief with our families. And they're all on the East Coast, so it's just Gail and I on the West Coast. And so Gail's sister-in-law offered to host both families, so my family and Gail's family, were going to gather and celebrate Thanksgiving in honor of Ruby and Hart. And we realized we had a couple of needs. One is that is this a sort of maybe it's specific to our family, or maybe it's all families, but gathering for Thanksgiving, someone's going to get on somebody's nerve, right? I think that's maybe universal. Something's going to go wrong, and someone's going to be, kind of pissy, or snipe at each other. And Gail and I, we couldn't take it. Just the thought of anybody being like rude to somebody else, or just aggravated. We're like, we can't be in that space. We have to be in a space just of love and grief. And so we just sent an email out to our family, said, just please, everybody be on your best behavior, basically. No arguments, because nothing else really matters right now. And I don't even know if we needed to send that. I'm sure they would have behaved perfectly anyway. But it did help Gail and I to do that, to reach out and say that,
Right.
please help us. And then we also wanted to structure it so that there would definitely be a moment where we would sit around the table and talk about Ruby and Hart. We had encountered enough gatherings with friends where by that point, where it can very easily turn and it becomes the white elephant in the room. Nobody mentions it, right? Everyone's scared to mention it for the first time, so nobody mentions it. Nobody mentions Ruby and Hart. And I don't think our family was going to do that at all, but just in case, we said, let's go around the circle. Instead of giving our thanks like we normally would do, let's give our thanks for being part of Ruby and Hart's lives and share a story about them. And that was really nice to do. Painful, but nice.
And gave people permission as well to speak.
Yeah.
On that.
Yeah. I think it helps.
Well, that's just a really beautiful chapter, and the different things with different holidays, including one that you said, we're going to leave the country and go someplace else. We're not ready for this particular one. You end with finding meaning and purpose. And the whole idea of a life that goes on, and you talk about the first time you and your wife, Gail, doing something new. For instance, learning Spanish was suddenly you're doing something as two and not as four, and you'd been such a close family.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Everything changes when you lose somebody who's so close to you, because it's all seen through this new light. And now suddenly, like you said, we started learning Spanish, taking Spanish lessons, and it was the first thing that Gail and I had done that we couldn't tell Ruby and Hart about. And it was painful. It was like on some level, it felt like a betrayal. We're living without you, but that's the reality. That's the reality of people who go on living. We have to live without the people we lost, and taking those sort of baby steps, and grieving it, but then also doing it, stepping out into life. Choosing to continue to live and have new experiences, as painful as that is really, I think, part of the process of moving forward in grief.
I'd love to ask your opinion about something, since you spent so much time reading and talking and thinking about this. Someone said to me once that grief doesn't get smaller, but here's this round black ball of grief, and maybe your life is this jar, and it fills the whole jar.
Yeah.
What they told me was the grief is never going to get smaller, but as you continue to live your life, the jar will get a little bigger.
Yeah. I think absolutely. I think that's exactly how it is for me too. I have two holes in my heart, and they're never going to heal. They're never going to close up. I'm never going to not ache for Ruby and Hart. I don't see how that would be. I wouldn't want that.
Yeah.
Why would I want to not ache for my children? I love them. There's nothing wrong with aching. It just hurts. But I feel my heart growing, absolutely. And as I move forward in life, I'm having new experiences and new compassions for other people, and new loves for other people. So I feel that way. I feel that the heart is expanding. Yeah.
You reached me right from the very beginning as a father and now as a grandfather. when you said that your primary identity had become, I am Ruby and Hart's father.
Yeah.
And next was, I'm the wife of my wife, or excuse me, I'm the husband to my wife, and then other things. And for that most central, most important identity to feel like it was gone, what has that been like, and how do you establish other
Yeah.
identities? And are there ways that you hang on to that very important identity even after they were
Yeah,
killed?
definitely. Yeah, I still am Ruby and Hart's dad. Um, and it shifted for a while, and I became the father of two dead kids, and that became an important part of my identity. Um, at first, I rejected it. I didn't want to be that, but then I sort of embraced it for a while, and then it felt weird because that was no longer the headliner of my life, and that
Mm.
was painful. I wanted to be first and foremost Ruby and Hart's dad and father of two dead children who were killed by a drunk driver. That was who I was. And then slowly, as I continue to live my life and have new experiences, and in fact, my wife and I are fostering to adopt two kids right now, a brother and sister. So I'm continuing in the role of father, but now to different kids. Um,
Mm.
and so I try to carry both at the same time. You know, I'm Ruby and Hart's dad, but I'm also these other two siblings' father now. Um, and it's never easy, but um, uh, but that's okay. I think that's okay.
I'm wondering if the fact that you haven't tried to bury them or their memory, I mean, let me rephrase that. I'm wondering if the fact that you haven't tried to bury their memory or say, that's too painful, I can't think about it, that you've leaned into that,
Mhm.
has that after time created a way for you to have joy in the knowledge that you were their father and what a great relationship you had?
Yeah, I really think that in order to feel that joy, I have to lean into the pain, because if I'm not allowing myself to feel the pain of their loss, then I'm also not allowing myself to feel the joys that we shared. Because
Mm.
because if it's too scary to think about them, because I'm scared of the pain, then I'm not going to think about them, and I'm going to miss out on all the joy that we had. That was a realization that came to me very early on. I talk about it in the book. There's this moment where I had these giant blow up pictures of Ruby and Hart. They were all along the living room walls, big, larger than life photos of them, and it was helpful to me to see their smiling faces in the living room. And then one morning it wasn't. It was scary. It was just it hurt too much. I thought, I
Mm.
thought, this is too much. I can't. And I looked away, and in that moment I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm allowing my fear of pain to block access to my children. I'm literally looking away from my children's faces because I'm too scared of the pain, and I can't do that. I cannot take that path. I won't. I won't look away from my children or our memories out of fear of pain. And that was really helpful to me. It continues to be helpful to me because the pain comes up all the time and it's always scary and you always want to avoid it. And it helps me to be like, actually, no, it's okay. I'll feel the pain because I want to think about my Ruby and my heart.
You did something interesting at the end of each of the chapters, which you gave suggestions for journaling and questions for people who might be
Mm.
reading. What prompted that, and will you tell me what response you've had from
Yeah.
readers?
Well, I think a lot of readers have responded really positively to the idea of these actions. And the actions came about because I felt like it was a central question. What do we do in grief? Like, what are we actually doing? And very few people talk about that. What are we actually doing as we grieve? Aside from just feeling sad. And for me, it was very helpful to take action. And I talk about it at length in the book about how uh, it feels like so much of our agency has been stolen from us in grief. We couldn't save the person we loved. They died. We didn't stop it from happening. And now we're just this victim. And if we can have agency in our grief, we can literally do almost anything, any kind of action at all. There's no magic to the rituals that I chose. Anybody can choose any kind of activity, but the actual act of choosing, of doing something, helped me moving through my grief. So I include a bunch of actions as suggestions, and then the journal prompts are also, again, suggestions if people feel stuck. I had one early reader that said, "You have so many suggestions; it's going to overwhelm the reader." And I was like, well, they're not. They don't have to do all of them. It's not like something, a task. It's just a spark, an idea if you're stuck. To get you thinking about the stuff that's hard to think about.
Boy, so many questions I'd like to ask. Our time is getting short. Here's another interesting thing you did, which was you decided to say yes to every offer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at first I wanted to say no to everything. I wanted to be alone. Same thing as Shiva. Don't come to my house right now. Leave me alone. But then I discovered, no, actually being out in the world, in life, it's helpful. And so the other challenging thing was if somebody said, hey, do you want to take a walk tomorrow? I would think to myself, tomorrow? I have no idea. I'm in fresh, acute grief. I don't know how I'll feel 10 minutes from now. I cannot commit to something a day from now. Who knows how I'll feel? So no, right? And to protect myself, no. But then I thought, I need community, and I want to engage with life, even though I don't want to engage with life. You know what I mean? Like, I know it's the right thing to do, even if I don't want to do it. And also it's hard to make decisions in early grief. You just feel so lost. You have no idea. Do you want a ham sandwich? I don't know. I don't know what I want. So it helped me to say, you know what? I'm going to say yes to everything, literally everything. If somebody makes a suggestion, I'm just going to say yes to it, not even think about it. And it's a little extreme. It's not right for everybody, but it helped me. And I could always say no at the last minute, by the way. I didn't, it wasn't like I wasn't committing to anything, but I ended up saying yes to everything. Yeah.
It sounded like that process helped you discover a few things that weren't helpful, but some that really were, like a grief group.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I went to multiple grief groups in the end. I went to multiple Compassionate Friends grief groups. I went to MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving grief groups. I went to Our House grief groups, which is an organization in Los Angeles. That's amazing. And they were all helpful to be in community as I grieved.
Surprisingly, because death is a part of each of our lives eventually at some point. We somehow are not taught, at least in our contemporary culture, how to grieve, which is one of the things I think is so valuable about what you've collected here, Colin, is ways to grieve.
Yeah.
Almost like you don't even know where to begin, but here are some options.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it helps that I'm not Jewish. So it's like I'm taking these Jewish ideas, but anybody can take them. You don't have to be Jewish to grieve in community. I think, and of course, other cultural traditions have wonderful grieving rituals as well. And I suggest that in the book. If you have a community, if you have a culture, lean into that culture, lean into that culture's practices. As much as you can, and any grieving practice you can lay your hand on, go for it. Yeah. Yeah, I think the one thing I would share is that I mentioned earlier about leaning into the pain, that it's so scary. I think people are so scared of grief and the pain of grief, and it can feel like if I start to cry, I'll never stop. I'll literally lose my mind. That's how it feels. That's what it felt like to me. But then, gradually, as you start to cry, let yourself cry and let yourself feel the fullness of your despair. I discovered that it comes in waves, and it's ultimately bearable. And so I would wish for people to not be so scared of grief, because in the end, it's a beautiful thing because it comes from love.
In your chapter on meaning and purpose, you quote Viktor Frankl, who had certainly been through his share of difficulties. In his Man's Search for Meaning, it is a peculiarity of man that he can only live by looking to the future. And that seems like such an interesting phrase to juxtapose with having your children be taken from you,
Yeah.
that how do you continue to have them be part of your future, and how do you have a future without them?
Right. Right. Because it feels like you don't. It feels like the future's gone. And that's where you can get so hopeless. But I think little by little you find your way. You find a way to look to the future and future think. Literally just think about yourself in the future. Hopefully, with your memories of your loved one, but also in this life as well.
Colin, this has been very inspiring to me, very touching to me to read the book, and I think given me some tools for what I'm sure are future experiences with people who I love, who will either lose their loved ones or have difficulties, where I will want to know how to speak to them, and that I can and should speak to them.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
So, thank you for speaking with me today in good faith.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.